Globalization was once believed to be the key to peace by promoting global prosperity. But in the rivalry between economic powers, the idea of free and fair trade is becoming less and less important. With its infrastructure project, New Silk Road, China is reinforcing its ambitions to become a superpower. The US is continuing to focus on America first. Yet global competition is being carried out on the backs of the poor. In Germany, the city of Duisburg rose like a phoenix from the ashes, thanks to China. The US protects its industries, even the apparently highly efficient agricultural industry, no matter what the cost.
We spend all this time telling ourselves how poor we are as farmers, but when I would go to the Illinois Farm Bureau annual meeting, it was mind-boggling to think of how many billions of dollars of wealth were sitting there.
As a developing country, Peru hardly profits from globalization, and it is mired in poverty.
But somehow or other, we've got to understand that globalization works, but it has not reached more than 30% of the world population. Very simple.
How much are we actually using trade opportunities in a globalized world? Doubt is now being cast on the World Trade Organization as the guardian of fair trade, and with it, on globalization itself.
I don't even think you can block globalization, but we need to look carefully at who are the winners and losers.
Duisburg in the Ruhr is the fallen bastion of the German and European steel industry.
Das war ja ein Stahl- und Kohlestandort, Duisburg. Und in den späten 70er Jahren haben Chinesen hier ein ganzes Stahlwerk, das Kruppstahlwerk, abgebaut, bis auf die letzten Schrauben, und nach China verschifft. Und damit war plötzlich das Aus für die Arbeitsplätze von 10.000 oder noch mehr Personen und hatte eine hohe Arbeitslosigkeit und brauchte dringend irgendwie einen Wechsel im Hinblick auf die Industriestruktur.
The city operates the Duisport, the largest inland port of Germany. As a logistics hub, it relies on the highly valued principle of just in time. The goods get there so punctually that the buyers can use them at once and can do so without needing warehouses of their own. Trade profits above all from China. The same economic power that flooded Europe and the US with cheap steel has turned out to be a savior in times of need. In 2014, Chinese President Xi Jinping crowned the Duisport as the endpoint of the New Silk Road and as the gateway to Europe. With the prospect of dozens of freight trains a week coming from China, Duisburg entered the alliance, but not at any cost. Duisburg was warned. Along the routes of the New Silk Road, China is luring countries with cheap loans for the construction of their infrastructure. Due to excessive debt, the ports of Piraeus in Greece and Hambantota in Sri Lanka are now in the hands of Chinese operators.
Aus unserer Sicht ist sehr bedenklich, oder aus meiner Bewertung sehr bedenklich, was in allen Teilen der Welt unter der neuen Seidenstraße an Linien realisiert wird. Da ist ja nicht nur Piraeus, da ist auch in Sri Lanka ein Hafen, der finanziert worden ist und notleidend ist. Aber das ist eben hier in Duisburg grundlegend anders. Die gesamte Infrastruktur im Hafen gehört dem Hafen. Und es ist auch nicht geplant, irgendwelche Anteile an dieser Infrastruktur zu veräußern, sondern es wird als Kernbestandteil des Hafens angesehen, dass die Infrastruktur im Eigentum des Hafens bleibt.
Transportation by ship would be cheaper. Nevertheless, 60 freight trains come from China every week. For their return trip, the wagons are loaded with goods from all over Europe.
Da sind ca. 70 Mitarbeiter, also verteilt in UK, China und Deutschland. Wir holen dann Pakete, also im E-Commerce-Bereich, also mit unseren eigenen Fahrzeugen. Und Sie sehen also solche Sachen, die dann draußen gelagert werden können, dann lagern wir halt draußen. Das ist einer unserer Kollegen, geht nach Hause jetzt. Da kommen heute gerade aus Frankreich. Wir werden hier in Container verladen und dann geht per Bahn nach China. Also 2 Wochen ist auch schon in China, 2, 3 Wochen. Jetzt im Moment ist es relativ schnell. Also Bahn 2 bis 3 Wochen. Also Seefracht, 30 bis 40 Tage. Da verkürzt sich die Zeit um die Hälfte. Chinesen kennen Duisburg. Also wenn wir in Peking Flughafen ankommen, also eine große Karte von Europa, man sieht nicht Berlin, man sieht Duisburg als Mitte des Europas.
Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there are more empty tracks at the terminals than usual.
Es wird für einige Unternehmen auch sehr schwierig werden, ist es auch derzeit schon, die schon jetzt sich die Frage stellen, überlebe ich das eigentlich? Im Moment laufen die Züge noch, die ja in der nördlichen Seitenstraße auch so zwar schon am Kriegsgebiet vorbei, aber noch relativ unbeschadet durchkommen. Aber ja, das wird diese Effekte haben, wie jede andere globale Auseinandersetzung auch. Diese allerdings in der Ukraine hat sich ja niemand vorstellen können.
The vulnerability of supply chains presents a risk. But Duisburg is bracing itself for the future.
Man kann sich nicht darauf ausruhen, dass man sagt, wir haben 60 Züge pro Woche aus China. Ob das so bleibt, es bleibt abzuwarten, da muss man Alternativen überlegen. Duisburg hat ja auch investiert in Triest zum Beispiel, um dort einen Standort zu bauen, der im Prinzip dann sehr viel stärker über die Türkei und von Südeuropa her bestückt werden kann. Also Duisburg ist schon dabei, Alternativen zu entwickeln, ohne dass es jetzt hier die Idee mit diesem Hafen aufgibt.
Duisburg's strategy in this global fight for logistics and transport is working. Forge a far-sighted pact and remain self-determined and flexible.
Ich glaube, die Corona-Pandemie, die letzten 2 Jahre haben uns gezeigt, dass der globale Handel filigraner ist, als wir das vermutet haben. Und die Konsequenz daraus wird sein, und ich höre solche Signale, dass man sich auf mehrere Lieferanten in mehreren Ländern, also geopolitisch das Risiko versucht abzudecken, einstellen wird. Das wird in der Konsequenz vermutlich auch zu teureren Produkten führen. Und das wird aber auch dazu führen, dass vielleicht auch mal Produktion, die man bisher in China hatte, wieder zurückholt. Aber es wird auch wieder Produktion dahin gehen, die da vielleicht bisher noch nicht war. Weil das Angebot, was China macht, das ist ja schon auch durchaus überzeugend. Wir haben es hier mit einem hochtechnologisierten Land zu tun und werden deshalb den chinesischen Wettbewerb auf Märkten erleben, wo wir ihn heute noch nicht so deutlich erleben.
Unlike Duisburg, the American steel industry is finding it difficult to enter new markets. Despite the fact that the industry has been fighting against cheap competition from overseas for 40 years. In Follansbee, they produce coke for steel production. Located in the country's northeast in the Rust Belt, the plant here is now closing.
I'd love to sit here and say that steel's going to be here forever. But 20 years ago, 40 years ago, if you were in Pittsburgh, you didn't think steel was going away forever. But there's almost nothing left there.
Steel made the U.S. rich and powerful. The railroad, machinery, and car industries were the big buyers. The closing of the coking plant will cost 288 jobs.
Well, there is an opportunity for most of the people here to relocate. Some of them might be moved into the Weirton plant. Other operations up in Chicago and Indiana, they can absorb some as well. Again, they might have to relocate a little further than they like, but
since the 90s, Weirton has closed a variety of its supply companies and steelworks.
I saw this happen at Weirton. Weirton used to be basically totally just on their own down there. They didn't have to depend on anything. They made their own center, and then they shut the coke plant down. They said, we can buy coke cheaper on the market. And that was true, they could. But once they could no longer make those products, and then these companies that were selling it had control of it, they started raising their prices.
In 2002, free global trade supplied the markets with cheap steel. To protect the U.S., President George W. Bush imposed import duties on steel from abroad. The World Trade Organization, WTO, as the arbiter of free and fair trade, found itself in the crosshairs.
US-Gewerkschaften riefen zum Widerstand auf.
Unser Standpunkt zur WTO ist, wir sollten ihr nicht angehören. Es kann nicht sein, dass die Vereinigten Staaten sich ihre Handelsgesetze aufdiktieren lassen.
Die amerikanischen Stahlarbeiter fühlen sich betrogen. Sie können nicht akzeptieren, dass andere Länder wettbewerbsfähiger geworden sind als die USA.
Wir sind die effizientesten weltweit. Das ist erwiesen. Alles, was wir wollen, sind gleiche Rahmenbedingungen. Man kann die USA nicht mit Brasilien oder China oder Indonesien vergleichen, wo es keine Umweltstandards gibt, keine Gesundheits- und Sicherheitsvorschriften. Ich denke, dass Importe unserer Industrie, einer wichtigen Industrie, geschadet haben. Und daher verfüge ich befristete Maßnahmen, damit sich die Industrie erholen kann.
President Trump also imposed punitive tariffs. The fact that Joe Biden is now promising European steel access to the U.S. market is arousing distrust, as well as in regard to globalization itself.
It's a very globalist administration. We were independent energy-wise, and we gave it up in a couple of years. And all in the name of free markets and globalization, but that doesn't sound free to me. And don't get me wrong, that probably worked out for a lot of people and a lot of jobs in other parts of the world, but it costs some here in this part of the world.
Globalization has lifted 1 billion people or more out of poverty. Now, that does not mean that it's perfect. It's not. There are obviously poor people within rich countries who have been left behind. And in those cases, their governments did not have the active labor market policies to help solve the situation where they lost jobs.
You know, there was a point in the 80s when National Steel was going to close Weirton Steel down. We were a division of National. And I was laid off for 18 months, you know, and not just me. I mean, the whole town was laid off for quite some time. You know, our town's a survivor. You know, we'll get through it.
The Margaret Manson Weirton Memorial Pool was a gift from the steel industry and a dilapidated relic from the city's glorious past. It would be sacrilege to tear it down.
This pool probably, as much as anything, signifies what we know, just growing up. Like I said, it opened in 1934. A lot of the emotion comes from people who don't live here anymore. Grew up here, but don't live here anymore. So when they hear, they're gonna tear the pool down, they go back to their memories. But they don't see what we see here today.
Countries like India and China are still flooding the world with cheap steel. America's steel workers are losing out. Of the 14,000 jobs in Weirton, less than 1,000 remain. There is space for new industries, but America First casts its shadow. Global action is replaced by national action. Steel companies are reluctant to take advantage of the opportunities offered by multilateral trade. They prefer to rely on government subsidies. It went down well when President Trump imposed extra duties on steel imports during the trade dispute with China in 2018.
It ended up helping us immensely both times, first when President Bush did it, and then again when President Trump did it. It helped our workers to weather the cheap steel that was coming in.
For generations, the Guerrera-Thompson family has made its living from steel. Karen has recently been widowed. Her husband, Carl, a steel worker, was a staunch Trump supporter. Carl died as a result of COVID-19.
If anything he was proud of besides his children, it was to be a steel worker like his grandparents and his parents. But when he worked in the mills, it was always pretty good. For us, it was times of struggle, times of good times, and then struggling times when the mill wasn't doing so good.
Less than 1,000 work there now, and it's from downsizing, getting rid of jobs, farming out the work. They gave it away and wasn't going to pay top dollar when they could get it somewhere else a lot cheaper,
I'm upset because downstate West Virginia has a new mill that's going to go in, and I don't think anybody fought for us here on our end of the state, because we lost 10,000 employees, and why wouldn't we stand a chance to get the 4,000 in this new place?
I think we need to be able to take care of ourselves, not just our country. Every country should be self-sufficient, because I don't see China selling us armored plate to build tanks for another world war, if God forbid that happens. I just watched it for years. I'm like, we're never going to be able to protect ourselves because we don't have the manufacturing to do it.
The way China conducts business with the rest of the world, it's the same thing. Everybody's out for their national interest. So once the globalization gets so big, then it's inevitably going to contract once people start feeling a little bit nervous about their neighbors growing too strong, growing too wealthy. Then we're going to start worrying about our own national interest.
Duisburg in Germany used both globalization and trade with China to reposition itself economically. On the other hand, America's steel trade union is looking for someone to blame for the industry's decline.
Our government betrayed America, betrayed the American steelworker, and they'll do so again today. We just had a bridge collapse in Pittsburgh. We can't even get the steel to rebuild the bridge from America. You have to go overseas, and China is one of the major culprits. They have built so many steel mills, they don't have the same set of rules that we have. They don't care about their environment, which environmentally, all countries ought to be required, and all mills ought to be required to have a clean process. But China, it's a filthy country, okay? And it's a dirty country. They don't care about the environment. They don't care about the people.
So many countries are coming up. Maybe some of them faster, some of them not so fast, so let's not exaggerate. But, China for sure. And some of these developments were not really thought through, so that the instruments we have, the rules we have, are a little bit outdated. They do not catch some of these developments. So that's absolutely right.
I was a strong advocate to get out of the WTO, World Trade Organization. Ultimately, you're not going to be able to do it by yourself, okay? Because there has to be exports. There has to be a system of trade, okay, on a global basis. But you can't protect certain industry within that global economy. Steel should be one of them.
It is naive to subsidize a mass product like steel if it has no chance of competing on the global market. A change in thinking is therefore required.
Enter into specialty and niche markets is a direction. They kind of had that with tin plate, that double reduced tin plate they made years ago. It was the best in the world. And that's what kept Weirton Steel afloat. And even in hard times, Weirton Steel could stay ahead of the other steel mills in this country because of their quality tin plate that they put out. It is a global market out there, and to compete in the long run, it's just not selling your product within the 50 states. We're going to have to be able to go into that worldwide market. And whether you like them or not, the crossroads end up at the WTO, so that's we got to be able to play the game as well as everybody else.
Washington, D.C. This is where the people responsible for subsidies and protectionism are. Those who govern here not only protect the steel industry, but also the agricultural industry.
And then the hammer really came down when President Trump rewarded agriculture by giving, tens of billions of dollars to American farmers, essentially to offset their trade losses.
Trump somehow came up with a way of distributing subsidies to farmers without going through Congress. We just get checks in the mail, so to speak.
2011 in Illinois on the farm of John and Aaron Phipps. Even then, agricultural subsidies were common.
Agricultural subsidies to be morally irresponsible, and there is simply no justification for it. I just get that for having a body temperature somewhere close to 98.6. Not because I do anything, not because I'm worth a while or any deserving factors, simply because I have those acres. I get $24 for every acre. Well, once you hand that $24 out to every farmer, then the first thing he thinks of is, I know I can afford to spend $24 more to bid on this extra 200 acres and make my farm 200 acres larger, because that's what we're all doing. We're trying to grow.
Welcome to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. I'm Ty Morgan, and here's what's in store.
John Phipps is now retired. He has a video blog for the weekly TV show U.S. Farm Report.
Last week, I began an answer to a viewer regarding carbon dioxide emissions. I have people who just can't stand me, and actually they're my favorites. And the other half are people who just got up early in the morning, generally on the stations early in the morning, and they're looking for something to watch, and they've gotten hooked on what's happening in agriculture.
The farm benefits from well over $100,000 in annual subsidies. They consist of compensations for crop failures, tax breaks, and direct payments.
In the 1980s, Dad said, there were years that the government payments, that's what the family lived on. The farm broke even at best, and that was the money that, put food on the table and got clothes on my back and got me to school and everything else. So, and even during the lean years, classic of a child, I didn't really know. I had no clue. So it wasn't true poverty.
Why we qualified for it, I'm not exactly sure, but money just poured out of the sky. And unlike European subsidies, we are drifting away from having to perform any actions, any environmentally responsible actions, or any quid pro quo.
Through the Trump years, I was a net drain on the economy because I got more back from the federal government in subsidies and payments than I paid in taxes. And markedly so. The Trump year monies were it was insane. Okay.
In fact, farmers in general tend to be Republican in the United States. So Trump, in order to not lose the political support of those farmers, transferred huge amounts of resources to farmers in the form of direct subsidies, income subsidies, to compensate for the foregone export revenue that they lost.
Former President Trump did very well. He knew who his base was. He knew who voted for him. And his thought was, as long as I can make amends for this group of people, I will get reelected.
Agricultural subsidies distort competition. Yet there is hope. Surplus food is no longer exported cheaply or even for free to developing countries where they destroy the markets of the local farmers.
Export subsidies are virtually off the table. There are virtually no export subsidies anymore. A bit of food aid, but export subsidies have been pretty much eliminated over the last 20 years.
It's not to our advantage to have a third of the world in economic squalor, because then we have no one to sell our goods to.
Countries whose agriculture was driven even deeper into economic misery by the agricultural surplus of the U.S. were mainly found in Central and South America. Peru is one of those countries. Its economy is in a sorry state with no discernible prospects. Unlike the US, Peru has no money to subsidize its meager economy. Corruption and mismanagement have weakened its economic development. Hernando de Soto is Peru's most important economist. He ran for president in 2021, narrowly losing the race. De Soto advises governments all over the world on economic issues.
Even though official statistics say that Peru is probably at the end of the worst of all developing countries, the fact of the matter is we're probably even worse than the statistics say. Between 2016 and today, we have had four presidents and 1, 2, 3 parliaments because the system has collapsed.
Peru has one of the highest COVID-19 death rates worldwide. During the pandemic, the shadow economy spread even further. The country is rich in raw materials, but they are mined mainly by foreigners, especially by the Chinese.
Perú tiene una fortaleza bárbara, decían antes, en su minería. Acá ya tenemos hace muchos años minas en la zona colindante con Chile, en el sur del país, minas de litio, que son las más grandes, litio que gran desarrollo. Entonces ya están muchos países interesados. China, por ejemplo, es el primero que quiere entrar. Bueno, China está entrando mucho en América y mucho en Perú. Está construyendo al norte del país un puerto que va a ser un puerto base, que es en el sistema de ellos del Pacífico.
Fishing is an important industry in Peru, but foreign investment in the major fishing companies is rare. Even China has so far held back.
Hay una inversión importante China en minería, en hidrocarburos, en otras actividades. Hay una presencia de inversiones china más o menos importante. Pero en la pesquería no es tanto.
The little town Chancay lives off fishing and off the fish meal industry. Along Peru's 2,400-kilometer-long coast, there are about 90 fish meal factories. A meeting with Miriam Arce and Juan Carlos Suero. Juan Carlos Suero is an economist and fishery expert for the International Marine Protection Organization, Oceana. Miriam Arce is fighting against the construction of a megaport. Industrial fishing is still taking a break. The fishing season starts in 2 weeks.
Y están ancladas, ¿no? Están ancladas en el lecho marino para que no se muevan, porque están conectadas con unas tuberías hacia las plantas de harina de pescado. Esa estructura azul es en donde llega el pescado por la tubería y por ahí entra a la planta.
Capturamos entre 4, 5, 6 millones de toneladas por año de anchoveta para producir harina y aceite de pescado. El 97%, 98% de la producción de harina de pescado se exporta. De eso, el 70% va a China. Entonces tenemos una gran concentración en China como destino de la harina de pescado.
It is a matter of time before China makes a grab for Peru's fish resources. Next to the small town and adjacent to a nature reserve, a new port is being built from scratch. Chinese investors are building a megapuerto, or megaport. The construction of this port has been the subject of dispute for years. The ecological and economical arguments, both for and against, balance each other out.
Y eso ha ocasionado una fractura, ¿no?, en el distrito de Chancay. Y para mí eso es gravísimo porque nos ha quitado identidad, hermandad entre vecinos, ¿no? Y para mí eso es muy doloroso porque yo he nacido acá, ¿no? Por supuesto, la facilidad para los chinos es grande aquí, porque no solamente van a exportar harina de pescado para que ellos consuman, no solamente es eso, sino que ellos tienen sus minas en el Perú de minerales, obviamente, y van a traer sus productos acá, a Perú, ¿no? Entonces, es exclusivamente para ellos.
The port will also rival the local fisheries in Shanghai. Chinese deep-sea trawlers will enter it once it is finished. And the Chinese are already fishing without authorization in Peru's territorial waters.
Actualmente, el tema de conflicto, digamos, es con la flota china que pesca calamar gigante. Ellos lo tienen que pescar fuera de nuestras aguas, no tienen autorización, que esa flota ha ido creciendo a lo largo de una década, se ha multiplicado por 3. El Global Fishing Watch es una plataforma muy útil para entender la dimensión de esta flota y entender su patrón, ¿no? Más o menos por julio está en el sur de Galápagos, luego va bajando hacia el Perú, Chile, una parte de ella va hacia Argentina, ¿no? Y es parte de esta situación de conflicto.
Peru is a developing country. 3/4 of Peruvians are working informally, without insurances for labor, social security, pension, or health care. And the well-educated are leaving the country. No government has been able to create a stable and sustainable labor market. Peru's economy is left behind in its attempt to profit from globalization.
No, of course, I cannot be satisfied with a system that's left 70% of the population behind. Well, what has changed is that we have now an awareness that globalization is not, and its virtues are not accessible to everybody in the world in the same way. Remember that we always talked about the informal economy, the first being that economy that didn't have rules that were connected to the global system. They had local rules, but they were not connected to more global rules.
However, Peru has had some small successes in its fight against poverty. In 2000, Mi Banco was the first Peruvian bank to grant loans to impoverished people without guarantees of their own, so-called microcredits.
Perú es el país que tiene el gran problema de la informalidad. Y la informalidad se ha producido porque ha habido mucha inmigración de toda la gente que vive en la sierra, en la serranía nuestra, en la parte andina, que ha venido hacia Lima. Y eso fue nuestro primer paso, salir a provincias con Mi Banco.
Helping others to help themselves and integrate into the national economy. That was and still is the goal of the small loans. 2009, a visit to Julio Solis, a manufacturer of gas cookers. Thanks to a loan from Mi Banco, Julio Solis was able to build his own business.
Para mí, a veces, un poco que me daba que darme para atrás, porque no tenía dinero. Y es ahí en donde empiezo a tocar la puerta de todo lo que es los bancos financieros, ¿no? O sea, toco la puerta y pues nadie me daba. Me decía no. Hola en tantas fábricas, desde las 4 de la mañana buscando un puesto de trabajo y no los hay. Entonces, yo creo que dando 5 o 6 personas estoy contribuyendo con mi país también. Mi parte de la población. Ese es mi sueño.
"12 years later, a meeting with Marlene Aparicio and her eldest son Franco at a cemetery near Lima. Julio Solis died in December 2020 at age 47.
Efectivamente, casi un año de su partida. La pandemia afectó básicamente a varias familias. En este tema nosotros también llevándose a nuestro padre, ¿no? Por este virus que hay en este mundo.
Vamos a seguir adelante sus enseñanzas, su forma de ser, un hombre íntegro, con las ganas siempre de realizar algo. Y un hombre que todo lo da por su familia, por sus hijos, y eso era lo más importante para él, su familia. Y siempre lo ha dado. Y un beso al cielo.
The little factory is still in the same place, but twice as big. "15 men and women have found steady work here.
Te cuento una anécdota. Yo fui una vez a un restaurante por Lima y veo en mi cocina, ¿no? Solís Gas cocinando y es una satisfacción muy hermosa porque están utilizando nuestros productos para su finalidad, lo que es servir a las personas su comida. Y eso, la verdad, a mí me pone contento. Él era su idea, incluso este año iba a salir al mercado internacional. Su propósito primero era ir a Bolivia y a Chile, respectivamente. Pero la idea quedó en mí, en mi mamá, en mis hermanos, en los chicos.
De verdad, fue nuestro primer préstamo, pequeñito. No me acuerdo cuánto era, 1.000 soles, creo. 1.000 soles en esos tiempos, ¿no? Porque antes los bancos que te cerraron las puertas, ahora te tocan la puerta. Te tocan. Te tocan y a veces nos damos el gusto de decir, no necesitamos préstamos. De verdad, por ejemplo, no quiero mencionar qué banco, pero nos cerraron, ahora te tocan. Dicen, no, necesitas un préstamo, está ya calificado, ¿no?
The excursion boats in Puno on Lake Titicaca are staying in the harbor. Because of the pandemic, tourism is only slowly gaining momentum. Lake Titicaca lies at an altitude of 3,800 meters. It is very polluted. The green, toxic carpet of algae comes from raw sewage. Most of the settlements were built illegally. Even the dead rest here illegally. The region around Puno is one of the poorest in Peru. The water level of the lake is falling. Due to global warming, the rainy season now lasts only 3 months instead of 6 months like it used to. In 2009, the development organization Pro Mujer supported fisherwomen with microcredits.
Pro Mujer busca como objetivo empoderar a la mujer. Por eso mismo nosotros, cuando damos un préstamo, confiamos en la palabra de la mujer. Para eso trabaja mucho lo que es capacitación en negocios. Les enseñamos, por ejemplo, a reconocer cuáles son establecer sus ganancias, sus costos, su inversión y poder salir adelante.
Mi vida personal ha cambiado porque siempre antes con la pesca casi un poquito bajo era, no dinero faltaba, así. Y ahora un poquito con eso ya estoy feliz, ¿no? Siquiera algo va a haber para mis hijos, ¿no? Para hacer estudiar, para ayudarme a nosotros, a mi familia mismo.
A reunion after 12 years. Gloria has given up fish farming. In the polluted water of Lake Titicaca, her fish kept dying. Naldi Delgado no longer works at Pro Mujer.
¿Y ahora tiene esas truchas, esas jaulas son tuyas?
No.
No.
Pro Mujer was providing microcredits long before banks made them into a business model.
Sí, yo creo que sí ha ayudado. Ha ayudado porque pasamos en una etapa en que las instituciones financieras no estaban en condiciones de brindar pequeños montos de crédito a las personas más pobres. Entonces, eso ha permitido de que hoy en día hay muchos micro y pequeños negocios.
The family plans to get into tourism with an island made of reeds. They invested the money they earned from fish farming in the project. The loan they had previously received of about $100 has had a lasting effect. But the impact of the pandemic threatens to dash the dreams of these small entrepreneurs.
Y más o menos en las otras islas por una noche cobran así una habitación por turista unos $150 así, ¿no? Más o menos. Ahora como estamos en pandemia, entonces hay poco turismo todavía, ¿no? Posiblemente nosotros vamos a empezar al año, de repente los turistas ya nos visitarán al año en el 2022, entonces. Para trabajar así con turismo necesita bastante capital.
Sí, necesita, ¿no? Porque a mí cauquits awisah wan kuna kan garanti poni maitisti. Kuna garanti mait ejukat khani mait asejman kit alloh. Yanap asip khrikt nanaga ka islan ha taqikunas falta phito, no? Taqikuna falte ukana gata que monirictua como mayam uthaspa como Pro Mujer. Uka warmi kamap ki garantiza se pheret khot uka walispa na monirictu khamha.
En realidad, las organizaciones, las ONGs que empezaron con programas de microcrédito, abrieron los ojos a las instituciones financieras más grandes y les demostró que sí se puede. Quizás ellas fueron las que arriesgaron más al inicio. Creo que eso es un ejemplo muy bueno para cualquier otra cosa de innovación que se quiera hacer para fomentar el desarrollo, mejorar las condiciones de vida de las poblaciones más vulnerables.
Han habido créditos muy exitosos, también han habido malos créditos, porque eso pasa hasta en las empresas más grandes. Entonces, esto ha sido el gran desarrollo que ha habido en Lima con lo que ha sido la informalidad, en Perú, la informalidad.
What I like about microcredit is that it is one way of getting to the solution. I mean, first of all, it is that people do want credit. And the fact that you adjust to help poor people is good. And in the process, we're going to learn. So I have no criticism of microcredit. What I do not like is when people say in Peru, our people are ready for microcredit and nothing more. Microcredit is a step in the right direction. It alleviates but it's not a final stop.
Globalization is in a crisis. The world trade system has fewer and fewer winners. Protectionism and nationalism are bearing fruit. For it's not the best that wins, but the richest. The geopolitical goals of the powerful turn many of the poor into losers. But when it comes to globalization, there is no alternative.
Globalization, in other words, is still a good thing. Of course it is. It's the division of labor. It is the bringing together of humanity above nationalism, above religions. It's a good thing. Those who are really globalized will continue to be stronger than those who are non-globalized.
How does trade contribute to the solution? Those are the right questions to be asking, not let's withdraw into ourselves and try and grow everything ourselves, produce everything ourselves, manufacture everything ourselves, because that in itself is highly risky. Let us invest in multilateralism, in global cooperation, in the multilateral trading system. It's a global public good, and we shouldn't underestimate how important it is.